My name is Rebecca Zanello. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Saskatchewan in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics. And today I'm going to be talking to you about probably a couple chapters of my PhD dissertation that are centered around grassland conversion, social identity, and business risk management programs. And we came kind of with a focus on Western Canadian cattle producers, but particularly those in the cow-calf sector. So, just to give a brief sort of, there we go, an introduction of who I am, kind of outside of academia. I am really passionate about the beef industry. It's something that I love. I've worked in the feedlot sector. My partner's family has a mixed cow, calf, and grain operation in southern Alberta. So I've done, lots of brandings. I love riding horses. I love working cattle. And so when I thought about doing my PhD, it was really important to me that the research that I do reflect this part of agriculture that I really, really love. So I've had kind of the beauty of designing a PhD and kind of research program that I'm really excited about, and most of it has centered around farm level decision making. The things that I'm going to be talking about today kind of fall under the first two bullets, which are land use decisions and then business risk management program adoption. But then I've also dabbled in a little bit of managerial skill work and some farm financial analysis. To get into like the nitty-gritty of what we're going to talk about today, the basis of this research was funded by a partnership between myself and my supervisor, Dr. Eric Michaels, and we had the pleasure of working with Environment and Climate Change Canada in partnership with the Saskatchewan Cattle Association. So all of the research that I'm presenting today is kind of thanks to them and thanks to this project. So it was really great to work on stuff on such an in-depth level. So the first project that we worked on was a literature review, and we kind of just went out and looked at what's available in terms of existing research on connections between business risk management programs and grassland conversion. Now, I'm not, because of time limitations, I can't get too deep into that today, but we actually did get that research published. So if you're interested, I have the name of the paper up there and it's in Rangeland Ecology and Management. But what we're really going to focus on is the second phase of this project. So once we had kind of looked at the literature and seen what's out there, we were able to then go a little bit further and conduct our own producer survey. So to give a sort of 50,000-foot view of what we found in the grassland conversion literature, there was a lot of wonderful papers out there that talked about the characteristics of parcels that are likely to be converted. So we know, and probably most people on the call are familiar with the fact that if you have land that has a good soil quality, it's not, it's super saline or sandy, and you have something that doesn't have a high degree of slope, so you can easily cultivate it with the traditional tractors and stuff that we use. When crop prices are high, and if that piece of grass is located in close proximity to existing cropland, the likelihood that it gets converted is higher than something that has kind of less desirable cropping characteristics. And that makes sense when you think about it. But when I was reading the literature, sometimes I found what was missing was, there are some beautiful pieces of native prairie all across Western Canada that could be cultivated that are not. They're still in grass. And then there is some pretty marginal land that, isn't really highly suited for crop production, but we see it planted. And so just looking at the characteristics alone doesn't necessarily tell us the full picture. And instead, we really wanted to focus on the producer or the person making that land conversion decision, what matters to them and what factors are important when they're considering that. And how do different groups of producers view the same scenario? So that was kind of the view that we took when we wanted to develop this survey. So we were able to survey 339 cattle producers, specifically cow-calf producers in Western Canada. Most of our respondents were from Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba. We used Insitrix Research Services, which is a local firm based out of Saskatoon, and we had the survey open for 3 months, and we were able to get our responses quite fast, which was wonderful. Now, we couldn't do a grassland conversion study without asking producers, have you converted land in the past? And we kept this to the recent past. So this is within the context of the last 5 years. We asked producers, have you converted any of the following, any native pasture, tame hay, or tame pasture from its current state in grasslands to crop production? And you can see from the chart here, most producers haven't converted any land in the last 5 years, but there is a sprinkling of producers who've converted anywhere from, less than a quarter of a quarter to all the way up to more than a section of land. We also asked them, okay, if you've converted land in the last 5 years, why did you do so? Unsurprisingly, we see that cash crops were more profitable, and keeping in mind again, these are usually mixed producers, so they have, a cow-calf operation, but they also have crop production on their land as well. And the margins for cow-calf production and for crop production are very different. It's a little bit tighter in the cow-calf sector than it is maybe in grain and oilseed production. So Eric and I weren't surprised to see that as kind of the number one response. But what we were really surprised about was that second one, the short-term conversion. That was really interesting to us. I think this is an area that we could be looking at maybe some future research, whether it's from us or from other people, in terms of looking at, what types of land are people converting with the intention to bring it back to grass at some point. Like, how short or long are these rotations? Are you going from native to tame or tame to tame? Kind of how are these short-term conversions looking? And then what are the ecological impacts of kind of a short-term rotation? So that's kind of a separate piece, but if I could do the survey again, I would ask a lot more questions on short-term conversions. But you can also see lots of other reasons for people converting land. Either it was new, it's close to stuff they're already cropping. So these were all really expected responses as well. Now, when we got into some of these non-economic drivers, I asked producers a lot of questions on this, but the one that I wanted to kind of include in this presentation was this question on how important it is to producers to have cattle on their operation, even if they do not provide a large financial gain. So you can see that at least 75% of the respondents in our panel said we at least somewhat agree with this statement. So it is at least somewhat important for them to have cattle on their operation, even if they're not making a lot of money. And that to us is important because it's like, okay, if you're going to have a cow-calf operation, chances are you're going to support your cattle in the summertime through pasture grazing. So this means that having grass is an important part of your operation, even if it's not giving you a large financial gain. So to kind of dig a little bit deeper into that, we asked producers some just of those Likert scale questions on a basic level, but then we also implemented what we would consider a social identity framework. The one that we decided to test is based on research by Fauchart and Gruber, and then subsequently Seeger et al. So both of those papers center around the same social identity framework. Now, I'm kind of giving a very broad view of what this framework is. So if there's questions at the end, I'd be more than happy to go into additional detail, but this is just kind of a general overview. And the idea is this social identity framework has kind of proposed three different pillars for decision making in an entrepreneurial sense. So why are you making the business decisions that you are? The first pillar is kind of centered around financial success, security, and profitability. So this would be like, I'm going to run my business because it's important to me to achieve financial success. These farms probably use other farms as a source of competition or view them as a benchmark or reference, but that financial profitability is a key motivator in how they make decisions on their farm. The second pillar is a little bit different. It focuses more on community and the idea that these producers would like to be heavily involved in their local community. When they make decisions on their operation, they're not just considering themselves and what's best for their business, but they're also thinking about what's best for their community and how their choices interact with the people around them. This to us fit really well with ranchers because you see a lot of people interacting with their neighbors and, helping out at brandings or moving cattle, and the community is an important part of that. And then the third and final pillar is a little bit more broad, and you'd consider this more of a global perspective. And so these producers would be really focusing on making decisions on their operation that promotes and advocates issues that they're really passionate about. A good example of this would be producers that are farming using regenerative techniques. If you're trying this alternative method and you're kind of making decisions on your farm that you're hoping will change the way that agriculture works as a whole. So it's a little bit more of a broad identity like motivation. And then you can implement this by asking producers again a series of those Likert scale questions. So strongly agree to strongly disagree. You ask them statements framed in a way that reflects each of the pillars, and you see, how strongly do they feel about questions like pillar one that are, or those that are centered around pillars 2 and 3. And then you can undertake what's called confirmatory factor analysis to develop profiles. So when we did that, we ended up with 3 distinct groups of producers within our respondent sample. So the first group are what we've called our profit enthusiasts. This was about 12% of the producers that we surveyed. And these producers identified strongly with all 3 of the pillars, but the strongest factor loading was on that financial success. So that's why we call them the profit enthusiasts. Like, they really identified with all three motivations, but the financial piece was the strongest. The second group are what we've called our non-economics. These producers had high factor loadings on pillars 2 and 3, so those community and broader missionary sort of identities, but they didn't have a strong loading on the profitability standpoint. And then finally, we had a group that we classified as what we called non-identifiers. And these producers, unfortunately, didn't strongly agree with any of the statements that we presented in the identity framework. Now, we kind of knew that this might be a possibility because it's not common to kind of merge like a social identity framework into an economic survey or kind of bridge a social science and economics kind of together. So especially not in agriculture, this hadn't really been done before. So Eric and I just were curious about it. We wanted to test it to see if this was a way we could quantify some different ways of looking at producer decision making. And unfortunately, for a decent amount of the producers that we surveyed, it just wasn't a great fit for how they make decisions on their operation. So moving into the future, I think there's some room here to kind of either develop a framework that is cattle specific or even farm specific. But yeah, so we had a few, like half the sample, it worked great for. These producers really aligned with what we were presenting them. And for the other half, it might not have been a great fit, meaning they make decisions in other ways. So I had these producers in the survey do a lot for me. So on top of asking them all these Likert scale questions, I also had them complete what we call in economics a discrete choice experiment. And the way you set these up is you present producers with a hypothetical scenario. So in our case, it was pretend you are the manager of this quarter section of native prairie, and I'm going to present you with scenarios in which you have to make a binary choice. You're either going to choose to keep the land as is in pasture or convert the land to a 3-year crop rotation. And every time I showed them a scenario, the attributes in the scenario will change. So the first thing that we had varied was the number of adjacent quarters in cropland. This was so that we could get a look at kind of the spatial distribution. Does it matter where the grass is placed and what is surrounding the grass? So we had changed the number of sort of yellow would be adjacent cropland, green is adjacent grassland. And then we also had a distinction between what you are in control of, so that would be the red border, and what your neighbor is doing. And we kind of wanted to see if that played into the social identity framework. The second thing we changed was this possible revenue scenarios for producers. So the idea here is that we centered the average revenue per acre. That didn't change across the scenarios, but we changed the number line. So the range of revenues changed. So some of them were really wide and some of them were quite narrow. So your range of possible revenues were a lot tighter than, this $400 range. Then the next piece that we played around with was crop insurance, because I was really curious on how do business risk management programs interact with the land use decision. So what we did here is we said to producers, in this scenario, in the hypothetical, crop insurance acts as it does in the real world. It kind of truncates the bottom half of your revenue range. So if you have a really bad year, crop insurance is going to help you out. But the key here is that we told producers you might have to wait for crop insurance. If you choose to convert this land, it's either going to be eligible for crop insurance immediately, as it is right now in Canada, or you have to wait 1, 5, or 10 years for access to crop insurance. The idea behind this is in the United States, there's a program called Sod Saver, where if you bring in a kind of legal land description, for lack of better terms in the US, into the crop insurance program for the first time, so you're cropping that piece of land for the first time, you've broken what would be maybe native prairie, you face limitations on your coverage levels and types of crop insurance you can buy. But that program doesn't exist in Canada. So we kind of just wanted to test how sensitive are producers to access to insurance. And then finally, we had a little element in there about biodiversity loss as well. Now, rather than presenting kind of all the model tables that we had, I'm just going to cover the general results that we found from analyzing the discrete choice experiment. We ran a binomial logit model and a latent class. So if at the end of the presentation there's more interest in that, please let me know, but I'm just kind of going to give you the general takeaways. Number one, by far and away, the most important factor that we found was that when you reduce crop insurance availability, particularly inducing a 10-year wait time for crop insurance, that significantly lowered the utility that respondents received from those alternative scenarios. So in common language, when we gave producers scenarios that said you have to wait 10 years for crop insurance, they were less likely to select the land conversion choice. We also found that producers who are risk-seeking or risk-loving those producers were less likely to select land conversion, which may mean that producers in general view crop production as less risky than keeping the land in pasture, which given the business risk management programs that are available to producers, that might be a logical conclusion. We also found a small connection between the identity framework that we implemented and producers' responses in the discrete choice experiment. So we found that producers who identified in that small 12% profit enthusiast category were more likely to select land conversion. Same for producers that have more cropland acres on their operation. We measured this as a proportion. So it was the proportion of cropland acres on your operation. If you had a higher proportion, so let's say 80% of your cropped land was in, or 80% of your land base was in crops, you were more likely to choose the land conversion scenarios. Same with producers that had converted more land in the past. Now I'm going to do a kind of hard pivot and we're going to talk about some business risk management programs because I also asked producers a lot of questions about that in the survey as well. I'm going to do sort of a brief overview on what livestock price insurance is, just in case anyone on the call is not familiar. Livestock price insurance is really the only cattle-specific business risk management program that's available to producers from a government offered perspective. If you're a mixed producer, you could undertake in crop insurance and you can, of course, enter into agri-stability and agri-recovery, all those things. But if you're looking to protect the cattle side of your business specifically, the only government program you have to choose from is livestock price insurance. And this is a baseline price insurance and it is not subsidized. So producers pay the full actuarially fair premium here. And there has been historically low adoption levels. So across all the provinces, but in Saskatchewan for sure, less than 15% of the calf crop is insured every year. And I have included in this little table at the bottom, this is kind of what it looks like for producers when they go to decide what they're going to do when they want to buy LPI. So the idea here is they can choose their insured coverage level in dollars per hundredweight. So this would be dollars per 100 pounds of the calf that you sell at the end of the policy. And then you choose how long you want your policy to last for. So if you plan on selling your calves in October or November, and then this is the premium that you pay again on a dollars per hundredweight basis. And if you look, kind of the key here is this note, these premium and coverage levels change on a daily basis. So for producers, they need to have a number in mind, kind of either you can think about this as what price do I want to get, like what is my ideal price for my calves and insure there, or you can choose to insure kind of a baseline, like what is going to cover my fixed costs and kind of a fire insurance, if you will. And you need to know those costs of production, and then you also need to kind of decide when is a good time to buy over the 16 weeks that LPI is available because the premiums are not constant. They change every time you look at them. So when we ask producers in our survey, have you ever participated in LPI? Have you ever bought a policy? You can see that the vast majority of producers have never purchased LPI and only about 30% have. When we ask that 30%, okay, when you bought your LPI policy, did you get a payout? And it's about a 60-40 split with more producers having purchased LPI and not received a payout than those who have. Then we can move into asking producers, okay, for the 70% of you that have never bought LPI, why have you not done so? And not surprisingly, we see that number one, it's too expensive. So I kind of alluded to this earlier, but the margins in the cow-calf sector are not huge. So sometimes spending an extra $20 a head is not a feasible option for producers. So it's expensive, and like I mentioned, it's quite complicated. Record keeping in the cow-calf sector is getting better, but it's not perfect. So for a lot of producers, determining a concrete cost of production that they'd like to insure with LPI can be a little bit challenging. Now we're going to kind of look at the opposite side. So not necessarily why are you not adopting LPI, but who is likely to purchase LPI. This is actually coming soon to the Canadian Journal of Animal Science. I'm really excited about this. We got this published as a short communication. So if you're interested in that, it'll be out in the next month or two. So we found that producers with large herd sizes and who have lower cropland proportions, so more grass, were more likely to purchase LPI. Now, this is it makes sense. You'd think, you got more cattle and you have more grass, but it also makes sense when you think about it from a business specialization standpoint. So if you're a mixed producer, as most of the respondents in our survey were, if you have a crop operation and you have some cattle, you can self-hedge if you have a decent enough crop operation, but if you're getting more and more and more specialized in cattle production, you might not be able to offset the risk of the cow, like calf prices, through your own grain and oilseed production. You might need to again take out some LPI coverage because aside from the futures market, that's or forward contracting, that's probably your only option. We also found that producers who have engaged with other business risk management programs, including ensuring a higher average acres in crop insurance, so kind of on average, what percentage of your cropland acres do you insure? Producers that answered with higher amounts of that were also more likely to buy LPI, and same with those who engaged in moisture deficiency insurance. And we also found that business structure had a little bit to do with it, where sole proprietors and corporations were more likely to purchase LPI than those who are in partnerships. Now, another product that is kind of available to cow-calf producers, but also to anyone who has pasture, is weather indexed insurance. Now, depending on the province that you live in, it has different names. So in Alberta, it's called MDI, Moisture Deficiency Insurance. In Saskatchewan, it's called the Forage Rainfall Insurance Program. And I think in Manitoba, it's Forage Rainfall Insurance. Now, to give a brief overview of this program, this is, again, because it's weather indexed, it's not farm specific. The idea is you can put in the legal land description of the pasture that you'd like to insure, and it will give you a list of all the weather stations that exist within 100 kilometers of your farm, and you select up to 3 weather stations and you can choose the weightings and the distribution of when you'd like to weight your precipitation. It gets a little bit complicated as well, but the idea here is that this is not based on rainfall on your operation, but instead is based on rainfall and temperature at the weather station. But this is a subsidized program. It falls under the class of perennial crop insurance, and it's available for all kinds of pasture, tame, native, bush, community pastures. This is a really cool program. And so we asked producers the same thing. Have you ever purchased moisture deficiency insurance or any type of weather index insurance? And here we have about 37% of producers saying, yeah, at some point I've bought one of these policies, and about 60% of producers have never purchased it. This is a really interesting one. In contrast to LPI, you see that actually a lot of producers that at some point have bought a weather index insurance policy, about 80% of them have received a payout. And that's pretty good when you think about like kind of likelihood of getting a payout. So we also asked producers, okay, if you're of the 60% that have never bought an MDI, why not? And here we got a really interesting response that a lot of producers were just unaware that this type of insurance existed. Now, the other half were saying it's too expensive or too complicated. And in hindsight, looking back, I wish I could have asked producers, would you be more or less likely to adopt moisture deficiency insurance if it was your farm? Because there is a little bit of risk when you take out an MDI policy when you are compared to a traditional crop insurance, which is based on the yield of your operation. Instead, you can kind of receive a best and worst case scenario. The best case scenario is it rains at your property and it doesn't rain at the weather station, and you get a payout even when you didn't need it. But you can also have the reverse happen where you experience a dry spell and the weather station does not. They receive rain and then you don't receive a payout even if you really needed it. So it's a little bit risky. They've done a really good job of trying to put in more weather stations and make it as accurate as possible, but there is still a little bit of risk when you're taking out a policy like this because it's not location specific. Now, we've also looked at, and this is kind of a little bit of a teaser of a paper that we're working on right now. We looked at the drivers of moisture deficiency insurance adoption, particularly in Alberta. And we found that when we looked at pure adoption likelihood, producers with more grass who've participated in crop insurance and utilized crop insurance to a higher degree, and producers with more cattle were more likely to purchase were more likely to purchase MDI. This is basically the same result as we found for the livestock price insurance. But then when we looked at adoption frequency, because we asked producers in the last 5 years, how many times have you purchased moisture deficiency insurance? And we found that producers who've converted more land in the last 5 years were less likely to buy moisture deficiency insurance, which makes sense if you think about it like they're pulling land, like they're kind of actively taking land out of grass, so they're less likely to buy MDI. But this result aligns with some of this broader work that we're doing on MDI in Alberta, where we found that parcels enrolled in moisture deficiency insurance in the previous year were less likely to be converted to annual crops in the following year and this effect is enhanced when payouts are received. So this is kind of a really exciting piece of work that we have coming up, where we're looking at how does access to forage insurance or producers that are kind of engaging with this program, does that make the grass more or less likely to come into crop production than a parcel that's never been enrolled in MDI? Now, just quickly to summarize here before we run out of time, from the survey, the main result we found is that producers do care about non-economic values. Those things matter to them when they're making land use decisions, and it matters to them in general when they make business decisions on their operation all the time. Identity frameworks have potential. I'd like to see them be incorporated into more economic research in the future, although the one that we chose offered us a decent fit, it wasn't perfect. The other thing that we really uncovered here is that crop insurance impacts land conversion decisions, but I would like to take kind of the perspective that instead of looking at this as, from a policy perspective, we need to be taking crop insurance away from producers who choose to convert grasslands. In my opinion, it just highlights how important crop insurance is as a risk management tool for those producers. And it really highlights when we look at, in combination with the other work that we did on LPI and MDI, how there isn't an equivalent program available for producers that are farming cattle. The type of support that they can get and the level of business risk management support that's available for livestock producers, particularly cow-calf, is a lot different than what it is for grain and oilseed production. And from my perspective, I think there's room for us to kind of support the cattle producers and support the people who are, kind of the stewards of the grasslands in a way that enables them to maintain their cattle herds and to maintain their grassland without having to sacrifice that when times are tough. From the kind of existing BRM program perspective, producers find LPI expensive and complicated, but participation increases as you specialize in cattle production. For moisture deficiency insurance, a little bit different. Producers are maybe unaware that it exists or find it complicated or expensive, but when producers receive MDI payouts, the land is less likely to be converted. So that's all I have for everybody today. I got my information up there. If you have questions or you want to see the full papers, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And thank you so much for your time.